So, namaskar, friends. And in the last class, we discussed Amitav Ghosh, and I told you that he is the contemporary voice of Indian literature and is a very established name. And not only that, we have seen he also emerges as one of the front runners of Indian diaspora writing because most of his works are concerned with the diasporic experiences of dislocation, relocation, cultural transitioning, and so on and so forth. So, continuing a discussion on his novel and his approach towards dealing with the diasporic theme in his novels, I would be talking about his first novel, The Circle of Reason. And even in his first novel itself, we come to realize how his vision of diaspora is different as well as very, very broad. So rather than confining diaspora writing to the experiences of a few white collar people who have migrated to mostly the first world countries at will for seeking a better fortune, Amitav Ghosh peoples his world with variety of people, mostly the people belonging to the cross section of the society. Like in his Ibis trilogy, we have seen how he talks about those Indians who are taken as indentured um, laborers to African countries and to the West Indies islands, and they included people from the cross section of the society, the outcasts, the people living on the margins, the people who were impoverished. So, and again, he broadens the horizon of diasporic discussion by talking about variety of reasons, variety of push and pull factors that are responsible for crossing over the geographical boundaries. And these reasons are not primarily economic, there are some other reasons as well. So there can be some social reasons, there can be some climatic reasons that might induce this kind of displacement. And that is why uh, his vision is very, very broad and cosmopolitan, and rather than confining himself to the discussion of the so called post colonial uh, white collar diaspora, he talks about the different historical, colonial, political determinants of diaspora. So, if we talk about the Circle of the Reason, the Circle of Reason, his first novel that was published in 1986, it follows the story of Alu, who is an orphaned boy with a distinctive lumpy head, who is sent to live with his eccentric uncle Balram in the village of Lalpukur, Bengal. And this is the debut novel, as I said, and it is a post colonial, post modern work that blends fiction with political and philosophical themes, including rationalism, science, displacement, and identity. The novel is notable for its non linear narrative, like many of the diasporic texts, where memory plays a very important role, and that is why there is a frequent shift of the narrative between present and past. So, this also happens to be a non linear narrative, and it has a global scope. As I said, the vision of Amitav Ghosh is quite broad, so covering India, the Middle East, and North Africa. So this story, travels to these three different regions of the world. And if we look at how the story is formed, it is formed around three parts. The first part, Sattva or region, is set in India, the village called Lalpukur, which is in Bengal. And the novel begins in this small village in Bengal called Lalpukur, where Alu, whose real name is Nachiketa Bose, lives with his guardian and adoptive father Balram Bose, who is an eccentric school teacher and a follower of phrenology. Phrenology, all of us know, is a pseudoscience about the shape of the skull determining personality. So it was believed that the shape of the skull shapes the personality of people. So Balram Bose was particularly interested in that. Balram is obsessed with science and rational thought, especially the works of 19th century French thinker Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur, all of us know, has been credited with, developing the germ theory and the pasteurization. Later on, pasteurization also comes from the theory propounded by him. So we find that Balram Bose is particularly, obsessed with the philosophy and rational thought of French thinker Louis Pasteur, whom he idolizes. He tries to bring scientific enlightenment to his village, clashing with the conservative locals, and his project becomes more controversial when it conflicts with the local Brahminical traditions and hierarchy, as we find it in the novel. Alu apprentices with Sombu, a weaver, and discovers his talent for weaving. He also develops feelings for Maya, Sombu's daughter. Meanwhile, Balram launches a campaign to disinfect the village, which escalates tensions with Bhudev. Bhudev is the symbolic figure who symbolizes, the Brahmanical uh, tradition and the conservative idea. So there is a tussle between these two, Balram and Bhudev, which in fact is a tussle between science and conservative thought. And so his project of disinfecting the village becomes controversial, and after a series of events, including a plane crash and the closure of the school, Balram opens the Pasture School of Reason. However, his obsession leads to a disastrous incident involving carbolic acid and Bhudev, and Bhudev accuses Balram and his family of terrorism, and as the police close in, a fire destroys Balram's home, killing him and others. Alu escapes, becoming fugitive. So, in the second half, we find, which can be termed as Rajas or Passion, the story moves to, Middle East, to an imaginary township known as Al Ghazira. So Alu flees to Calcutta when the fire kills his local guardian Balram. He flees to Calcutta, then boards a ship to the fictional Middle Eastern country of Al Ghazira, and later travels to North Africa. So his escape to Al Ghazira, which is modeled on oil rich states like Kuwait or UAE, although it is not identified because mostly this is fictional. So Alu escapes to Al Ghazira, where he works in the house of Jindi, an entrepreneur woman who runs a boarding house for migrant workers. Here, Ghosh explores themes of migration, labor, and post colonial globalization, portraying the lives of displaced people from South Asia and Africa who serve the oil rich economies. Alu continues his pursuit of learning, engages in textile weaving, drawing from his background in cloth making, as I said, and tries to live according to principles of self reliance and reason. He meets several other characters, including uh, Sombhu Devnath, Sombhu's sister, and Kulfi, who are also grappling with displacement and identity in a foreign land. Al Ghazira, in Al Ghazira, Alu also becomes involved in efforts to empower laborers and educate them, drawing government attention. The state suspects him of being a revolutionary, mirroring the suspicion he faced back in India. So we find that why Alu had to fly from India, because he was suspected to be a terrorist, and so was also looked at with suspicion when the house of Balram caught fire and they were all burnt alive. So, throughout his journey, he encounters a cast of displaced characters, immigrants, exiles, and outcasts, each struggling with his own sense of belonging and identity. So, the character of Alu tells us how he struggles when he traverses from one country to another. And like Alu, all the characters in the novel set out and experience a lot of struggle throughout the novel because of isolation. So, the life of the immigrant workers and others are imposed by the miseries, helplessness, and exploitation, as we find in the novel. Well, so what happens, because in Al Ghazira also Alu is suspected being a revolutionary who is instigating the laborers, and that way is challenging the entrepreneurs of that oil rich country. He has to fly from there as well, and so he moves to North Africa, and that is the third part of the novel, Tamas or Death, and that takes part in Al Uwaid, Algeria. That is the setting of the third part. So Alu flees once again, this time to Al Uwaid, a desert town in North Africa, symbolizing a kind of metaphysical and literal end to his journey. Here, Alu's life enters a more philosophical phase. He becomes involved with a new group of people from diverse backgrounds, all of whom are also migrants or exiles. And this part of the novel, delves deeply into the questions of identity, cultural belonging, death, and the nature of knowledge. Alu's journey reaches a kind of full circle here. He continues weaving, teaching, and living by the ideals instilled in him by Balram, though now tempered by life experience. So, what we find, the difference between Balram and Alu is that while Balram, tries to follow rational thought without connecting it with real life experiences, Alu, by virtue of um, having lot of experience of life, pursues it with some kind of practical wisdom. So eventually, the Indian police inspector Jyoti Das, who has been pursuing Alu throughout the novel, finally catches up with him. However, rather than arresting him, Das experiences a form of intellectual and emotional transformation. He comes to understand the complexity of Alu's life and ideals and lets him go, signifying a moral victory of reason and compassion over state authority and ignorance. Friends, we have seen that this was the debut novel of Ghosh, and at a later stage, also, if you talk about the Calcutta Chromosome or other of his novels, he has always been grappling with the question of reason and conservative thought, and has always tried to bridge the gap between the two, and has always been in favor of reason. So through the character of Alu and through the ending like this, finally it seems that reason has um, reason and compassion, they have found their firm feet at the end of this novel. When we talk about this novel as a diasporic text, we find that the themes of displacement, isolation, migration, quest for home and identity, economic motivation, and exploitation, they are very, very pertinent. Um, if we talk about other themes as well, we find the themes like rationalism versus superstition as embodied in Balram's love for science and conflict with traditional village beliefs, uh, you know, as symbolized by Bhudev. Exile and migration, we all look at Alu's journey that mirrors that of many post colonial migrants navigating identity in unfamiliar lands. Science and knowledge, again, another very important consideration in the novel, as the novel critiques blind faith, uh, whether in superstition or rigid rationalism. So, Ghosh is not only critiquing Bhudev for his superstition, rather, he is also critical of people like Balram, who turn fanatic when pursuing rational thought without really looking at its pragmatic value or practical uses. So, post colonialism is yet another very important theme. Through settings in India and the Middle East, Ghosh critiques the lingering impacts of colonialism, which has resulted in the chasm or the gap, economic gap between people of different nations, and has provided a ready made scope for economic exploitation as well. Textiles and weaving, symbolizes both Alu's livelihood and the interweaving of cultures, identities, and narratives. So this weaving symbolizes all this. It is not meant to be weaving um, per se, but symbolically it also talks about how the cultures are interwoven and how identities are intermixed, and how the narrative itself blends, then circle of reason. The title of the novel itself is very, very important. Circle, the narrative structure and metaphor, like reason, passion, and death, as I said, reflect cycles of life, belief, and learning. So, Ghosh uses a non linear, multi perspective narrative, interlacing past and present and combining realism and allegory. The novel resists a straightforward categorization. It's part Bildungsroma, part philosophical treatise, and part political commentary as well. So, if we look at this novel, we'll find that it's a very rich and complex novel. When we talk about displacement, we find how the novel shifts from one place to another. And what is important here is to look at this reason for displacement. As I said, Amitav Ghosh is different from other writers in that he also talks about different reasons for displacement of people, including nature and climate also joining the party. So, one of the settings of the novel is Lalpukar, and the residents of Lalpukar are all diasporic in nature. After East Pakistan became Bangladesh, they came to Lalpukar and settled there. And I quote from the novel: they had immigrated to India in a slow, steady trickle in the years after East Bengal became East Pakistan. Most of them had left everything but their dialect behind. It was a nasal sing song Bengali with who knew what mixed in of Burmese and the languages of the hills to the east. Many of them had learned the speech of West Bengal, but it had only made their own dialect more dear to them, as a mark of common belonging and a secret weapon to confuse strangers with. So, this story is set in Lalpukar, which itself is uh, beset with diasporic people, the people who have migrated from Bangladesh to Bengal. These people engage all their potential of life in thinking what they have lost, how they have become almost have nots, despite having all those lavishness of life left over in the other part of the border. And as it happens with most of the people, and as it happened with many people during the partition of India, the partition of Bangladesh also, resulted in a similar kind of story of displacement, where a lot of people had to leave behind everything that they had possessed for centuries, um, and to land in a different place as impoverished beginners. So I quote, their only passion was memory, a longing for a land where the green was greener, the rice whiter, the fish bigger than boats. And this tells us about the longing, the memory, the nostalgia that the diasporic communities often, cherish. So this, for these people, the ideal world is the one that has been left behind. For them, the dearest of all is their own homeland, and that is why everything belonging to the homeland is out of the world, that is the best in the world. And that is why in this particular line we can see they are longing for a land where the green was greener, well, the rice whiter and the fish bigger than boats. So they are the victim of political partition between the two Pakistans. The emergence of new nation somehow displaces them from their country of origin, makes their life uncertain and vulnerable, placing them within the term refugee. So the protagonist Alu, or Nachiketa Bose, becomes a fugitive after being wrongfully accused of terrorism, as we discussed earlier. His benefactor Balaram, the school teacher, is killed in this terrorist attack, is sabotaged, but then in fact a fire kills him and his family. And Alu, since he escapes, he is suspected. So this accusation propels him into a life of exile, marking the beginning of his diasporic journey. To escape from the police, he runs away from country to country and continent to continent. In the course of his journey, he comes across many diasporic men and women and faces the varied immigrant experiences, events, and situations. So, it is through Alu that the novelist captures the spectrum of diasporic life, and there are many people like him who are on the run for different reasons, and they all have these stories of their loss and loss of property, loss of identity, and loss of belongingness. So the novel also explores the theme of intentional migration. So in the case of Alu, we find that it's a forced migration. That is the reason, Amitav Ghosh is so important, because he talks about all kinds of migrations and different situations leading to these migrations. So in this novel also, he talks about both kinds of migrations, forced as well as intentional. So he explores the theme of intentional migration, where people from different countries come to Al Ghazira, an oil town, for doing different jobs. The town is full of migrant laborers and foreign settlers from various parts of the world. And I quote from the novel, it was a merchant's paradise right in the center of the world, conceived and nourished by the flow of centuries of trade. Persians, Iraqis, Zanzibari Arabs, Omanis, and Indians flattened upon it and grew rich. So he's talking about a world that is highly volatile and highly active, where people are undertaking journeys from one part to another in search of better job opportunities. And Al Jazeera or Al Jazeera in this novel turns out to be that place where people from all over are coming in search of better life opportunities. In part 3, as we discussed earlier, the presence of immigrant Indians is evident not only in Al Jazeera but also in the small Algerian town of Al Ued, where Jindi and Alu eventually choose to relocate along with Kulfi and Baby Boss. So there they are joined by fellow Indian migrants such as Mr. and Mrs. Bama, Dr. and Mrs. Misra, and Miss Krishna Swami, highlighting the spread and settlement of the Indian diaspora in diverse global locations. So, friends, if we look at the spread of Indian diaspora during the colonial period, we find that Indian diaspora spread to all parts of the world, and there were people who migrated for different reasons, for trade and commerce, for propagation of their religion, or they were also subjected to forced migration, and so on and so forth. So in this novel we find that you know lot of Indians are in movement, and they are moving from India to the Gulf township, then to Africa. So we find that all sorts of people join in this bandwagon, and they go to diverse global locations. Moreover, Jivan Bhai Patel offers a compelling example of a truly diasporic figure, a Gujarati Hindu originally from Durban, South Africa. He eventually finds a home in this oil town after a prolonged journey of displacement, prompted by his family's disapproval of his marriage. So, I mean, we find this happening in other novels by Ghosh as well, in which he talks about the outcasts, the people who could not bear with the conservative Indian society, and that's why they were living on the margins, and they looked at migration as an opportunity where they can express themselves. So, this Jivan Bhai Patel, who was born and raised in Durban, South Africa, he comes to Al Gazira because his family does not approve of his marriage, which he has planned himself. Similarly, characters such as Professor Samuel, Kulfi, Karthamma, Rakesh, Abu Fal, Florid Mia, Hizi Fahmi, and Mastram are all individuals who have settled in this place, each carrying their own histories of migration and resettlement. So, the lives of immigrant workers and diasporic traders in Al Jazeera, a global marketplace, reveal the harsh realities of globalization, including economic disparity, exploitation, modern day slavery, and human suffering. In the novel, most characters are portrayed as victims driven by the hope of financial stability and the urge to escape the poverty and hardships of their native lands. The novel portrays Al Jazeera as a melting pot of cultures where immigrants from various backgrounds converge, forming hybrid communities that transcend national boundaries. So, focusing on a motley group of illegal migrants, I quote Daya, who observes, focusing on a motley group of illegal migrants drawn from various parts of India who traveled to the imaginary Gulf state Al Jazeera and then Algeria. The novel, The Circle of Reason, depicts the struggle for survival of those displaced by dispossession in globalization, people whose very bodies bear the violent marks of this historical passage. So, friends, we find that the story begins in Lalpukar, uh, Bengal, where we have the community of people who have migrated from Bangladesh, living under deplorable condition because they have left behind everything that they possessed and were forced to migrate. And again, there are many more people who have been displaced like them, not only displaced but also they have been dispossessed. So because of this disposition, their life has become very difficult and volatile, and that is the reason why they have to run and rush in order to earn their living. So it occupies a unique place in the field of post-colonial literature, as the novel criticizes globalization by depicting the experiences of those in uh, migrating and transition in search of work and better lives. The novel is about displacement, migration, and seeking for identity, as Howley observes. If we look at this novel as an example of a diasporic text, we find that you know people are compelled to migrate from one place to another, and but then there are other people who are also migrating by choice. But whatever may be the uh, compelling reason for their migration, they are all struggling, and they are all victims in that the kind of aspirations that they nurture while making these moves, those aspirations are never met, and these people are always forced to make compromises in their life. So if we look at this novel, the Circle of Reason, it's a richly layered novel that traces the journey of Alu from India to the Middle East to Africa, portraying his transformation from a fugitive to a symbol of resilience, knowledge, and ethical living. Towards the end, we find that he establishes himself, sort of, and Jyoti Das, who uh, travels all the way from India to Algeria to catch him up, is also convinced by the reasons for uh, his migration, and is ultimately convinced that he is innocent. So finally, despite all these ordeals, Alu is able to make a living out of it. So, he turns out to be a symbol of resilience, knowledge, and ethical living. And the novel challenges boundaries, geographical, cultural, and intellectual, and ultimately affirms the value of reason, compassion, and human connection in a fragmented world. So, friends, this is to me one of the most uh, effective diaspora novels, and because we find that the theme of diaspora is central to this novel, uh, woven through the narrative as both a literal experience of exile and metaphor, and a metaphor for intellectual and cultural displacement. The novel explores the emotional, social, and political dimensions of migration, dislocation, and search for identity in a transnational world. So, we can say that Ghosh ultimately portrays diaspora as both a condition of suffering and possibility, where alienation is matched by creativity, resilience, and the forging of new kinds of solidarity. So, in fact, his views on diaspora are quite clear. Although the migrations and displacements are traumatic and testing, but nonetheless, the resilience, the adaptability, and the never say die attitude of humans is what is required in order to make a living out of it. And in this novel, at least, we find Alu and his fellow characters meeting this kind of challenge with positive energy and positive intent, showing resilience, adaptability, and passion for living. So, friends, this is all about this novel, um, The Circle of Reason. These are the references you can refer to. Thank you very much. In the next class, we will again talk about yet another important diasporic text, and I intend to bring a full spectrum of the diasporic text so that our understanding of diaspora is itself rich and multifaceted. So, do join me for the next class. Thank you very much. Thank you.